Congratulations on the ongoing success of your book. It is reaching now to new and wider audiences and appeals to more people.
Look, thank you, with gratitude. Thank you so much for what you've said, because your words do actually mean a lot to me. We take a lot for granted, but actually I agree with your sentiment that in the last 12 months, I think there's been an awful lot more recognition around the word trust. I think boards of directors have certainly been wanting to adopt a different approach, especially when it comes to sort of employee engagement and some of the issues that they've got in productivity. So from where I'm standing, yeah, it's absolutely gratifying. There's one thing I have been doing over the last 30 years is looking at the trust issue, but certainly in the last 10, we've seen the changes, and we do know that no question that companies are trying to take a different stance when it comes to trust. And trust comes in various forms, right? I mean, data trust, employee engagement and trust, geopolitical trust, government trust, business to business trust, third party supply chain trust. These are all very in the headline, as it were, topics, right? So look, it's broadly speaking, it's a huge subject.
Can we start from the beginning? What prompted you to undertake such an extensive research, commission the poll, and write a book on such subject?
I'm not sure if you're aware of all of my background, but my first real job was actually at Citibank. I was an officer of Citibank back in the late 80s, and this is the first time when I started to examine the trust issue. And then we're talking pre-FSA days, so there was no real financial service regulation. We were preempting what that regulation would look like, and it's really sad to say that the FCA, and prior to the FCA, it was the FSA and the PRU, that we have to have frameworks, and we have to endorse regulation to get conformity, for many reasons. So since the bank, we've seen an awful lot of debacles. Now, only last week we had the IBEM annual conference, which was all about unlocking executive leadership in the trust economy, and the whole subject matter was trust, funny enough. And again, I said there, I used a couple of metaphors, as it were. I quoted the values from Enron and also the values from Wirecard, and I said, these values sound great, don't they? Actually, what I've just quoted you is the values from Enron and the values from Wirecard, and everybody started obviously looking at me in a very funny way. What we've been missing, and look, I know you and I have had a conversation about research around trust, and look, wherever we look, if you look at the Weatherall report, which actually looks at 169 banks worldwide and their customers, there is zero trust. Okay, number one. Number two, if we look at even IBM's research report around trust, which I commissioned in view of certain articles that I was actually writing at the time, we found, out of all of the survey participants, that 69% of that report done by Datapad, they did not trust their CEO. They did not trust their line manager. Okay, now let's bring it up to date, because I think bringing it up to date is really important. If we look at 2023 and the Gallup report, right? The Gallup report is phenomenal, and that was the global workplace report, showed that only 23% of our workforce are actually working. So that's a huge 77% of people that are not being productive. That's got a cost to the global economy of $8.8 trillion. That's more than, well, that works out actually of about 11% of GDP, okay? Which is more than Amazon, Apple, and Google all put together. So do we have a problem? Oh, yes, we do, right? And you can, lots of people that don't really know too much about the subject matter blame COVID, right? They blame COVID. They blame the pandemic. You can't blame the pandemic. Everything that we're talking about was overdue, right? Way overdue. We're talking about cognitive behavior. COVID accelerated that behavior, but actually, the flawed problems that we're describing and discussing right now were actually huge before that. They weren't being addressed. You know, if we start to look at the McKinsey report on the global CEO, which is pretty much the same, whether we look at Wiley, whether we look at Bain, or whether we look at, you know, KPMG or PwC, they say the same thing, that 84% of our leadership is still stuck in what I consider to be a horizon one set of thinking. That actually horizon two, they're not crossing the chasm to horizon two. Now, horizon two is transformation. Of course, where we really want our global leaders is in horizon three. But you're not going to fix any of that if you can't fix employee engagement and productivity. Most importantly, trust. We've got a trust issue. You know, it was the famous Tom Peters that said technology is not the issue of the decade, but trust is, right? Why are we not listening? You know, active listening. I was actually doing an article today, which I'm quite proud of. And we were discussing active listening, and you know, look, never underestimate the issue of active listening, because active listening, actually leads into empathy, which leads into understanding, then communication. Well, you could actually argue that 10 years ago, what were we doing? We're just waiting for someone to stop so you could leap in without actually fully understanding and listening and having empathy and humility against the subject matter. Look, if when you listen and you have empathy and you have understanding, you're in a position where you can actually communicate with credibility. And that credibility, of course, leads ultimately into purpose and trust. You know, organizational purpose. You know, we're seeing a lot of the millennials now saying, look, I'm not going to work for this XYZ company because it's got to have purpose. It's got to share my values. So, we've seen the ESG agenda, but I'm more interested in the trust agenda, because I'm starting to see, like, Deloitte did a huge paper on this, and it was all around the trust agenda. And it talked about where boards of directors now, we're talking about the CTO, not the chief technical officer, the chief trust officer, right? Now, I think that there is a necessity. We've played with the CPO, the chief people officer, and right, there has been a difference, from dealing from standard HR best practices and principles. But I think the chief trust officer, I think, is incredibly important, because trust is across the whole of organizational development, and if you're to manage this, it has to have a seat at the board, has to have a voice at the board. Actually, I'm pro trust, the trust agenda for boards of directors. Now, you could argue and say, well, we've got governance. Well, look, everybody on the board is a governance guru and governance expert, right? But nobody really fully has an ability to understand trust, put in what I consider to be a trust framework, right? When I mean a trust framework, I'm talking about a genesis of trust. In an organization, leadership should actually understand what self-trust is, what relationship trust is, what organizational trust is, what market trust is, and most importantly, societal trust as within a framework. Now, it's not a fluffy word. If you look at some of the practitioners that have been very successful over the years, and you can look at people like Stephen M.R. Covey and his Institute and Academy on Trust. The Edelman report, actually, this year's report is phenomenal because it talks about dividing divisional divisional trust, and it talks about how we are so divided and we're not together, we're not unified, we're not conforming. And one of the big reasons we're not conforming is because we don't have CEOs that actually rise to leadership around some of these subjects. Accountability is particularly difficult, but when you start getting to dividing people's mindsets, attitudes, values, you've got a bigger problem, because the divide becomes so vast, and it's so vast, it's beyond bringing it back to a central core set of values, vision, mission, and personality trait, which enables really to make a difference. I mean, back in 2003, I think it was, when I ran Metro Media Technologies, that was a failing business across 12 countries, in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We were looking at a turnover around 7 million. But with the changes that I made, particularly around employee engagement, I took that business to 250 million, right, in 2.5 years. I could only do that because I had individual contribution and inclusion, and more importantly, I had employee engagement across country. Maybe we're doing too much. Maybe what we're doing is we're super busy. Maybe we're all things to all men, and we're not prioritizing what is significantly important. And that should reside with the board of directors. Okay. So when we start talking about things like governance, we start talking about risk and audit. I see trust being at the very center of all of this, and actually should be top of the agenda, because it's about people. No point designing great generative AI and great metaverse technology solutions and all the rest of these things if people are not a part of the equation, right?
Absolutely.
Some of the subjects that you've seen probably on social media today, Emma, are all around things like human-centered design, and we've got issues with psychological safety, and we've got mental health issues, and we've got well-being issues. Well, look, you can start addressing all of those issues if you bring trust into human-centered design within the confines of design-led innovation and thinking within an organization, because you've got the culture canvas, you've got the leadership canvas, you've got the financial business model which is attached to innovation and growth. And actually you've got alignment, because you've got people, technology, and solutions on a growth trajectory, and not isolated. The worst thing you can have in an organization, and one of the biggest issues I actually had when I was at MMT, was that I had isolated islands. I had people in these islands, and no one was talking to one another. Everyone had every excuse under the sun not to work together. What I had to do is effectively rebuild that, okay, with a completely different mindset, a different attitude, a different mentality. It was Julio, my Portuguese director, who said, Geoff, you haven't just created a brand refresh here, you've created a new religion, because the emotional attachment, the emotional engagement they had, okay, was not 9 to 5. It was being a part of the team, about winning with the team, and they wouldn't leave their desk until the projects were done. Now, where's that passion gone? Where's that emotional engagement gone? We're hearing lots of articles saying, oh, what we actually need is emotional intelligence. No, it's not. It's only a part of the solution. We need IQ, we need EQ. Duke University in the US has talked a lot about spiritual intelligence and decency intelligence, and I know a lot about that because I've worked on and around those intelligences. I've written about wisdom intelligence because I think that some of the problems that you've got in society today is that the millennials, the Gen Zs, and Gen Ys, they're not working together. And if you take the attitudes of intelligence, speed, accuracy, and you start putting wisdom the grey hair and the pinstripe suits together, you've got a winning combination, because you've got the wisdom and the knowledge and the commercial capability with the young, driven, purpose-driven kind of attitude of intelligence, of vision, and so forth. And you put that combination together, you've actually got something quite powerful, right? And then finally, trust intelligence. You have all these other intelligences, but it has to have the trust umbrella, right? So for me, it's incredibly important that we have that trust intelligence as the umbrella for all of the other intelligences, and not singling these out. It's no point saying, oh, we need leaders that are going to have a higher EQ than IQ, and forget decency, intelligence, and spiritual intelligence, because that's just fluffy stuff. And wisdom, well, we know what we're doing. No, you've got to have the influences of all of these intelligences in order to be a better leader. And a better leader doesn't mean in the last 5 years I've been a really good CEO and I've been a really good leader. That was 5 years ago. Things change in 5 months, 5 weeks, 5 days, 5 minutes. So you've got to have that adaptability, flexibility, and ability to lead in today's business world. And that means possibly additional learnings. That means L&D. I mean, look at learning and development. That came straight off companies budgeting, because they thought it wasn't, we don't need this. We don't need to re-employ. Now you look at someone like EY, the EY Academy. You've got employees that out of role curriculum, they want to do an MBA in psychology, or they want to do an MBA in something. They will train you, because they believe that learning and education is a big part of their employee benefit, that they have this academy, that you're not restricted to just being in legal or commercial and finance or auditing. You can have the ability to learn more and grow, because EY recognizes the value of having their people educated within their organization, right?
Can you tell us about any companies which have managed to restore their trust after having realized that the lack of it was a problem in their culture? Also, which strategies did they use?
You might remember the London Live interview. I talked about, London. I'm very proud to be a part of London. You've got 10 million people all running around, but the problem is we're in the most disconnected community, right? It's like the analogy I like is that you've got these hamsters just running around, right, and that no one's actually talking to one another. Now, I go back to the relationship, and I'll go back to this question. I am going to hit it because I think this is incredibly important. The relationship, we're too transactional, Emma. We're too transactional. We're too 2D, right? And in order to restore trust, we need to be able to have solid relationships, which is based around trust, right? Now, that is quite a hard objective to meet, and there are companies that have been successful with this. I can look at some of probably a few areas and industries. If we look at the pharmaceutical industry, there's very little trust in the pharmaceutical industry, but Eli Lilly did achieve a big program in rebuilding that trust. I would say the other example in the pharmaceutical industry is Johnson & Johnson. I think that they did a particularly good job with the employee engagement. They didn't say, look, we're going to do a series of workshops and leave it, and say we're going to tick the box that we've actually educated people around how they should behave with one another. They used it as a KPI and a set of metrics. At IBM, we've created a trust matrix, and we don't believe that trust should be trained or educated without having metrics on how to build better trust within organizations. I did a podcast for one of the big pharmaceutical healthcare institutes in America, where I was talking about this in greater depth, but I brought it back to the issues that the healthcare or healthcare has as a general. So look, pharma, there's a few great examples there, but if we go outside pharma, you can go to entertainment, you can go to places like Alton Towers, where they had a complete 360 turnaround on trust. And Sports Direct is probably another good example where there was some really bad press a few years ago, and they had to try and get their brand, their public image, and more importantly, the change in mindset and attitude. And sometimes to do this, it requires a completely different set of people. And what I'm trying to say here is that, when you look at the Harvard Business School hockey stick, the S curve, you can see where the business starts, and you can see how the trajectory moves forward on the S curve. And during times of economic or geopolitical uncertainty, certainly economic uncertainty, you sometimes need to change the people. And it's not just the people, it's the mindset to be able to take that company or that institution back on the journey to increase growth. So there are a lot of moving parts. There are the companies that are deploying design-led thinking are ahead of that curve. The companies that refuse and believe that strategy is tasking, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, but some people still believe that strategy is just executional tasking, are, I'm afraid to say, going to hit a brick wall. Failure is probably in the high 90s. It needs a business reinvention if you're going to address some of the issues. And look, there are companies that are absolutely beyond recovery when it comes to the staff, because a good example of that is divisional managing director may go in to a division. He or she may be the sixth divisional MD that they've had in 5.5 years, and the staff don't know really how to engage, and therefore you're going to have lack of productivity. Trust is going to be a big issue, because they want to know whether he or she can actually have authority over making decisions, and that sometimes can be a real difficult objective to overcome. So they'll sit around for 9 months, and he or she, as a divisional MD, may get fired, because it's all about immediacy. It's all about executing immediacy today in order to make way for growth. And sometimes these divisional MDs don't have the investment or time from the board or from the stakeholders and investors to actually execute the plan. Other CEOs do have a period of time to effect change, but what we're seeing at the moment, a lot of what we're seeing at the moment is short-termism. Short-termism is very short-lived, and I'm afraid to say it doesn't help the trust issue. When you've got short-termism and you're not thinking short-termism to medium-term with a long-term. Look at the Japanese. You go to Japan, you work in Japan. I've worked in Japan. You've got companies there that have 150-year business plans. 150-year business plan, right? It's crazy, but they always execute because they've got the planning and the frameworks. It has the ability to have flexibility and change, but the plan set clearly defines the goals and what needs to be achieved.
Would you say that transparency is the foundation necessary for building trust?
You're talking about a subject very near and dear to my heart. So when I start to look at the word openness, if we start looking at what I said before, I said active listening, I said empathy, humility, and understanding. It is incredibly important as a leader to have a philosophy which is based on, or authenticity. Authentic leadership is what we need at the helm. We need chief executives to not be dogmatic around this is the way, or step out of my way. We need leaders to actually provide, openness, and more importantly, to provide inclusion into the decision making process. Don't alienate your people. Don't alienate your executive leadership team. Don't alienate, middle management, because at the end of the day, there may be somebody at the back of the room that's got something incredibly important to say. Bring them in, make them a part of that. Make that a part of your strategic DNA in terms of your values, right? Because I think that then provides that teamwork, that unity that I talked about, right? And more importantly, you're showing an interest in engaging with your people. And I think this is something which a lot of leaders still don't perfect, and they wonder why they're losing people. I mean, look, quiet quitting is nothing new. Talent acquisition and the issues around talent sustainability, and some of the attrition rates that we've been seeing on staff retention rates, I've seen them in the mid to late 40s. You can't sustain a business at that level. You need to be, in the early teens. But more importantly, it's what you do with your people. Why hire a smart person, right, if you're not going to bring them in to be a part of the decision-making process, right? And I think leaders have got a lot to learn, and I think leaders need to change with this. This openness, this transparency, this authenticity, this inclusion that I talk about, incredibly important for the modern day leader that needs to lead companies today through geopolitical and economic, disturbances, because it's a different set of risks, it's a different mindset, and it's a completely different attitude to leading people.
Absolutely. And what about technological advancements which require data security these days? How can companies adapt to a digital age and provide data security while being open and transparent with their stakeholders and building trust with them and the employees in particular?
Not a difficult question then, right, Ian? So look, I've got a few problems here. We haven't even touched on data privacy, and we haven't touched on it. Look, I've written several articles recently on about cybersecurity and about data breaches, data trust issues, more importantly, privacy of data, and it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. It doesn't matter where we look today. We've got data breaches that are taking place internally, and a lot of what we're seeing is because lack of trust. A lack of trust. We many years ago, probably 15 years ago, we were always concerned about IP and within organizations, and who was taking what data and what files from what C is part of the C drive, etc. So I think on the cybersecurity side, the way some companies have addressed this is by having a global CISO on the board who does understand, data security and the importance of data. Look, wherever there is high levels of risk in data, there is also opportunity. Let's get it. It's not all bad, right? But it's having someone that really can translate. Having a CISO on the board means that, like from a technical advancement point of view, the proposals that get put to the board are sort of translated to a language that the board understands. But more importantly, boards need to be more aware of the risks that are attached. Where we have been over the last sort of 10, 15 years is been in a situation where when there's a problem, it's then addressed. That's too late. We saw that in the pandemic. We saw all of the data breaches that were happening with whether it was universities, whether it was institutions, became greater and actually more aggressive. More aggressive. One of the big problems is that individuals in their own right don't own their own data. The Googles, the Amazons, Apples have exploited data, and they continue to exploit data. And actually, when we start looking at e-privacy and you start looking at the privacy regulations and compliances around the world, both here in the UK, Europe, obviously, and particularly in places like California where they've got e-privacy. This is they take it incredibly seriously. But even though they're taking it seriously, and even though they're fining organizations and institutions for not having best practices at the level which they would normally expect, the other issue is the regulations for super clever technologies like generative AI, like metaverse. We do not have the right regulations in place, even today. And that policymakers need to start addressing these issues if we're going to significantly take this more seriously. So I am a little bit scared because from a technology point of view, we are advancing so quickly, yet we're failing with the ethical, moral standpoint with data, how it's being exploited, how it's being breached. We don't necessarily have, everybody can't afford a very high level global CISO on the board that can educate the awareness, the risks, and more importantly, put the frameworks in place which can actually make the working environment better, or at least a conformity to the way and the seriousness of the hacks and also the breaches that are taken on a daily basis. So for me, this is a big red flag, and there's not enough being done. I think at this point it does need government intervention. It does need the ability for government to work with businesses, particularly FTSE 100, FTSE 250. But let's not forget the SMEs, because they're targets. Even small businesses are targets today. No one's going to get away from the fact that you can be hacked, and nobody ever really does anything about it until it's too late. And then the consequences are that your business is going to fail because you've got £1 million worth of Bitcoin needs to be transferred, and then tomorrow it's another million, so it's kind of like, it's a big issue and it needs to be addressed. I think with Darktrace, the dark world, I know we're getting regulations coming in regarding Bitcoin, and that side, and digital currency and that side of things, but there's just so much work that needs to be done. I mean, we haven't even touched the surface.
Ethical conduct is a cornerstone of trust. How can the leaders cultivate ethical corporate culture which would ensure that there is trust between them and their employees?
I like to say ethical and moral conduct. I'm a great believer that this issue is just so big in its entirety. Corruption has never been so bad like what we're seeing today. And I don't know if you remember, but there was the Bribery and Corruption Act, and it in itself, whilst it was there and still is there, it applies to some people and it doesn't apply to everyone, because of, if you're looking at government, they have a certain way of operating. A business has a certain way of operating. And at the board level, chairs and independent non-executive directors, particularly because they have independent biases, should have a voice on all of this at a greater level, because it does affect the risks, and they have a responsibility to the business around how business is conducted. We had conduct risk as well, which was a big issue. Particularly, I was dealing with that 15 years ago. Funny enough, conduct risk around the insurance companies, and how that was being perceived. Look, it's not unified. It's in pockets. There are pockets of this best practice working okay, and you do need those pockets because you can build on those pockets, but it's not uniformed across all of the areas of business today. And corruption, I'm afraid to say, has never been so rife. Wherever you go in the world, they're bypassing morals, ethics, and such things as conduct risk and as I said, having a Bribery and Corruption Act, which we've had in play for an awful long time, contracts are signed, quoting para and verse across, all of the conditions of such an act. Yet it's a different word because it needs to be practiced. I believe that if you've got a set of values within the organization that says, we're a trusted company, we're ethical, we believe in ESG agenda, we believe in trust and blah blah blah. It's not a set of words. It needs to be a living, breathing set of best practices that is basically a personality trait across the organization. Again, the only way it appears to have conformity is where government and government agencies have regulations, and where clearly where they fine companies, organizations, because of misconduct or gross misconduct around the act. And that seems to be the only way to teach people. And it shouldn't be that way. Strategy and governance should be something that a company's board has the ability to actually not just conform, but instill in others and ensure that it's monitored and managed correctly. Look, some of these the Bribery and Corruption Act, it does actually involve, some pretty heavy clauses around what will happen to a company if they don't confine. And I said earlier Wirecard, but that was a great example, right? It was a great example. No one ever thought Wirecard was this and that, and what the CEO was doing, and the CFO, importantly. We've seen it in the telecoms era in the 90s, right? If you look at Bernie Ebbers and you looked at WorldCom when they bought MCI, and he bought something like 69 companies in 18 months. And the NASDAQ loved him until they found out what he was doing. He was asset stripping, right? So look, and we've had some conformity because of that, but it's still pockets of good, strong ethics and morals that need to be instilled. And Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McGluff is a very good friend of mine, and he talks about serpent leadership, but he talks about ethics and morals. And one of the reasons that he's not a 2 or 3-star general is because he refused to cross the line. Right? Fact. He'll tell you that. And in our organization, albeit quite small, IBM, we have a code of conduct, and trust is a cornerstone at the very center. And the moral conduct of our clients, the moral and ethical conduct of the way we behave, and trust is at the center. And if we don't have that, we walk away.
With the benefit of your experience and research, what would you advise for the startups? What they can and should do from the start to ensure that trust isn't lost and develops organically within them?
I mean, if we're only talking about startups, obviously, there's a different set of dynamics with smaller startup companies than there is, as you know, larger SMEs and, of course, FTSE 250 and FTSE 100. One of the biggest problems you've got in startups is founder syndrome, right? You're not going to get away from it. It's my baby. I've effectively mortgaged the house to the hilt. I'm paying your salary. And what comes with that Sometimes is because some founders just do not have the competencies or the skills. Now, for an employee, they look up to the founder in a startup because that's the wrong reason they're there. They want to learn, they want to do cool projects, they want to work on cool projects. But skill and competence builds credibility, which ultimately builds trust. What we have seen over the last couple of years is, as a direct result of not having the skills and the competencies of others, but still wanting to remain the title of CEO. I did a TV interview about 10 years ago on, and I called it the emotional wake of transformation. You know, you may like the title, but do you actually have the skills to execute? This is a big problem in startups. Narcissistic kind of behaviors, toxic environments. This is not going to help founders. Founders need to understand the barriers of their skill and their values and their worth. You know, wearing different hats is a big problem in startups because you have to wear different hats at different times. You know, one minute you're dealing with the accountant and you're dealing with the finances and the balance sheet, and next minute you're dealing with BD, next minute you're dealing with marketing, next thing it's products failed, the MVPs failed, or the POCs failed, or whatever might happen. So they're wearing different hats at different times, and not necessarily sticking to their core competence, and they're self-learning through the process. And what happens is, as a manifestation, is that, you know, you'll get to a certain level. So literally, if a startup goes from, let's say, 0 to 1 million, then 1 million to 5 million, at that 5 million trajectory, it's a very good time to start saying, well, actually, you know, my core strength is X. I need to bring certain personnel into this, who do have the skills, who have the ability to take us up the hockey stick, as it were, to from 5 million, let's say, to 10 million or 20 million, and actually accept that, you know, I've done a good job today, but it's not necessarily my job going forward. And it can be really difficult for some of these founders, and the founder syndrome that I described, moving forward, and that can actually put the company at detriment, which I don't consider that to be useful, especially when an early stage VC is coming in to start to fund these businesses, whilst, you know, they'll do psychometric examinations on leadership and they'll understand certain things. They will force the change if the change isn't already done from an organizational point of view. So I think that some of the things I've just categorized, I think, are incredibly important if the business is looking to sustain, increase, pivot, and exit.
Trust is particularly challenged and tested during the economic crises times, similar to the ones we are going through now. It may be easier for many to follow your advice in the times of economic stability and growth, but what would you advise to the leaders trying to save and preserve and maintain trust within their organizations at the times of crisis? What strategies would you suggest they may use?
So I think it's a very good question. Number one, I think the challenges that you're talking about, and I touched on it earlier with geopolitical and economic challenges, which a lot of leadership and a lot of younger millennials have never really had to deal with in the past, right? This is a different terrain at a different speed, right? However, irrespective of all of that, there are no shortcuts. If anything, the sort of the risk management side of things that I described needs to be a greater significance for the business. And I think that from a culture point of view, culture can be a great starting point in redefining the trust issues and trust within the organization. It's actually a very good time to start looking at what we discussed earlier about, you know, data security, data trust. It's a time to actually look at what we're doing, how well we're doing it, but also start thinking about, yes, I understand the immediacies and why the immediacies need to happen today, but the short term and the medium term, if you don't start planning that period of time, with the right trajectory, with the right set of people, then you're going to fail anyhow. So for me, I think this is a great period of re-examination, understanding what the company's strategy is, deploying better risk management, better controls around audit, and the financial side of the business, which I think is key. And also a time, and it shouldn't be a time where everybody gets frightened and holds back with investing in today and tomorrow, i.e. the future, which generally happens in a downturn of economy. People, stop contracts with consultancies and marketing and all these other PR and all these other things. This is the time to actually start assessing where you are, but more importantly, what it's going to get, how is it going to get you there, and more importantly, who with. But I think from an evaluation point of view, this is the right time to start addressing some of the most fundamental things in business, because one of the reasons we've got such a bad mental health with our employees and with our people is basically because they're not being managed and they're not being led correctly, and they don't have trust. GSK, funny enough, just recently won an award for psychological safety and well-being within their organization. That should be a flag for everyone to start thinking about, about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and who with. And I think it's time for change. It's time for business reinvention. It's not time to hold back with our resources and money. It's time to be spending and investing in the right people, in the right areas to drive growth and with trust.
All people are different. Employees, stakeholders, everyone. How much would you say empathy and understanding of the individuals plays role in building trust in an organization?
We've been doing a lot of work around empathy mapping of late, and I actually believe that it's incredibly important to have empathy around this subject. One of the reasons I go back to, I hate talking about mental health so much in a discussion, but one of the reasons we've got large problems in mental health, and particularly in 15 to 24-year-olds, believe it or not, is because there's not enough empathy, there's not enough humility, and people are not listening enough. So we're not listening, and we're not communicating correctly. A lot of people are spending a lot of time in isolation, because people are not talking to one another. If you look at the City of London now, I've been in the city 3 times this week, and the events that I've been to have been absolutely extraordinary. Energy exchanges, creativity, solutions. We should be doing more of that. Each and every one of us should be doing more. It's not about wearing our pajamas at home and kind of dancing around the dogs, walking and this and that. Look, before the pandemic, you still had to walk the dog. You still had to go to school to pick the children up, right? It was a balancing act, right? It was a balancing act. So take this seriously. This hybrid is not really working. Employers want their people back in the workplace. They should go back to the workplace. However, only if you've got an open, authentic leadership with empathy, with humility, with understanding, where they are supporting their employees across the challenges, right? If it is 2 people that needs to be employed to do one set of objectives, then that should be discussed. It shouldn't be just an email saying, sorry, you're no longer required to work with this company by email, right? It's more open discussion, more face-to-face communication, and with all the attributes that we've just talked about, that is required. That's a different kind of leadership, but that's a leadership that's required in order to go forward.
Your book appeals on many levels to different leaders of different organizations, small startups and international corporations. Why does it find so much resonance with such different people? What do you attribute its success to?
If I start with the last question first, I think there's been a tremendous amount of curiosity over failed relationships in government and government trust, in business to business. And believe it or not, I consider leadership to also be at home. When we wrote the book, what we didn't want to do was to come from a place where it was just a technical framework book, which didn't actually speak to people. I'm very proud of the book because it does speak to the communities that you described. In the last 12 months, I don't think I've never seen so many articles and so many people talking about the word trust. But it does please me, obviously, on many levels. Look, I didn't write the book to make millions of dollars. I wrote the book because people need to read or listen to the book, because we've got it audible as well. And people are curious, but more importantly, because of the breakdown of these relationships, and by the way, in vast numbers, I might add, right? And because of the trajectory we find ourselves on, which actually builds itself around the word uncertainty, right? People are curious and they want answers, and sometimes they're not talking to their friends like they used to. They're not talking to the one-to-ones, but they're trying to find some rationale behind what's going on in their own individual lives. And that's irrespective of whether it's at home, business, or government. And so we wrote the book because we wanted to be open and we wanted to be fairly direct on an array of different topics and scenarios that would support and help people through this terrain. But I'm pleased to say that, in the last 12 months, we have seen a very large uptake in the book and the subject matter, and workshops and lectures that I've been doing over the last 12 months has been quite immense. But it's not about reading, it's about application. And so in the book, because of the hard lessons that we both have been through, both Mark and I, it was time to write the book. And we talked 10 years ago that we were going to write it. But for me, no better time in the world was last year to actually publish the book and get the book out, because we want to help people, we want to support people. More importantly, we want to make a difference to people's lives. But that can only take place if people apply the practices. And I think that's the bit we're stuck with at the moment. People are reading, but they're not necessarily making change to their lives, and they need to, in order to reap the quality of reward that life can give you, right? And to do that, trust is at the corner of everything we do.
Your book deals with trust issues between employers and employees. But what lessons can be learned, and which advice may be extended to the area of consumer trust, customer experience, and retention?
So I've read the book, as you can imagine, several times. Right. It is my book. And I did a lot of editing. The techniques not only are tried and tested techniques that do work, number one. We've also followed some of the global trust architects, which are people like Patrick Lencioni, like Stephen M.R. Covey, Stephen Covey Sr., and people like Simon Sinek to a certain degree. But both Mark and I are architects around trust, and what reason why we've got various audiences is because one of the main things is we thought from an educational point of view, and we've actually lectured to some universities on the book, because we wanted to try and have people at a grassroots level understand our methodologies, understand our experiences and case studies, because that's always the best way at grassroots. Understanding the way they behave is very important for us, because the trust still doesn't go away, right? Their behaviors, their cognitive biases, their attitudes. So that was very important. From a business to business point of view, it's been failing for years. It has. I mean, and the biggest problem is business hasn't wanted to change. Business hasn't got a choice now. It's got to change to improve. So the book addresses what companies need to do to change with trust. And again, to make employee engagement stronger, better, purposeful, but with that emotional connection to the brand and to stakeholders and peers. From a government point of view, I don't think I've ever seen a world government so impaired in all my life. You know, if I look at North America, if I look at Southeast Asia, if I look at Asia, Asia Pacific, the UK, I've never seen government so impaired in all my life, and that's several ways. That's with government not being able to make good decisions that impact our people and societal. Number one. Number two, it's delivering to the people, which is obviously an important part of any government manifesto. And it's number three, being consistent with delivery and words and delivery. You know, the UK alone, I remember when I launched this book, the UK alone in last year had 3 prime ministers. You know, you're not, we were a laughing stock for the rest of the world at that point. So look, there's no better time, in my opinion, for people to take on board what I like about the book, what I love about the book actually, is the ability to be able to, it's like a go-to book. So we cover an awful lot of topics which are so relevant today to help people. It's you can dip in and out of the book. You can have it on your phone and you can listen to it going to work in the car. So again, in the same way, you can dip in. Today you might have an issue with so and so. We have got testimonial, advice, tips, and models to help people in any situation, in most of life's difficult situations. And so I think that one of the things I would say to people is read it, because and you know what, if you don't enjoy the book, I'll be happy to refund you the money you paid, because we've had everybody that I've spoken to who's written to me personally thanking me for writing the book, has been hugely impressed, that it's done something. Like, we're all looking for golden nuggets, we're all looking for something to improve our life. Well, for me, the book addresses lots of nuggets. In each chapter, there's something that someone can take away and use. But if they use that, we can start reducing mental health. We can start bringing in ethics and morals. We can start looking at better value systems, a purpose-driven approach to life. And most importantly, if we can trust each other more, we can live in a much better societal. And I think that what Mark and I have tried to do with the book is to say, look, somehow I'm sure we can make a difference with the book. And we all want to be a part of greatness. We always want to be a part of something. And that's why we wrote the book. And for us, we talked about the trust movement about 12 months ago, and we were sort of talking about that. And look, it's too big for something like the trust movement, but we can touch people's lives just by the ability to be able to have people read the book. And so from that point of view, that I think is incredibly important.